Muy buenos días. Muy buenos días tengan todas y todos ustedes. La Facultad de Medicina de la Universidad Nacional Autónoma de México les da la más cordial bienvenida a la conferencia magistral Confianza y tendencias en la publicación médica que impartirá la doctora Kirsten Vivens Domingo. Nos acompañan en el presidium la doctora Ana Carolina Sepúlveda Vildósola, directora de la Facultad de Medicina de la Universidad Nacional Autónoma de México. La doctora Kirsten Vivens Domingo, editora en jefe del Journal of the American Medical Association. El doctor Jaime Sepúlveda Amor, profesor emérito de la Universidad de California en San Francisco e investigador emérito del Instituto Nacional de Salud Pública. La doctora Gabriela Borrallo Sánchez, secretaria general de nuestra Facultad de Medicina. Y el doctor Andrés Elío Castel Rodríguez, jefe de la División de Investigación de nuestra facultad. Vamos a escuchar en primer término el mensaje de bienvenida de la doctora Ana Carolina Sepúlveda Vildósola.
Muy buenos días a todas y a todos. Saludo con mucho gusto a quienes me acompañan en el presidium, al doctor Jaime Sepúlveda, a la doctora Kirsten Vivens, a la doctora Gaby Borrallo, secretaria general, y al doctor Andrés Castel, jefe de la División de Investigación, y a todos ustedes por estar aquí en esta mañana acompañándonos. Es un honor dar la bienvenida a la doctora Kirsten Vivens Domingo, editora en jefe del Journal of the American Medical Association, una de las revistas médicas más influyentes a nivel mundial, y a la doctora Kimi Eng, reconocida investigadora en oncología y líder en el estudio de cáncer colorectal. Las revistas JAMA Network, como ustedes saben, han sido un pilar fundamental en la difusión del conocimiento médico a nivel global. Con su legado de más de 130 años, han marcado el rumbo de la investigación clínica, impactando no solo la práctica médica, sino también la toma de decisiones en salud pública y la formulación de políticas sanitarias. Publicar en JAMA y sus revistas asociadas es un sello de calidad, rigor científico y relevancia clínica, lo que convierte a este encuentro en una oportunidad invaluable para nuestra comunidad académica. Hoy, además de recibirlas con gran entusiasmo, valoramos especialmente la oportunidad de establecer un diálogo con nuestros investigadores, quienes buscan generar conocimiento de alto impacto y compartirlo con la comunidad científica internacional. Su visita nos permite fortalecer la conexión entre nuestra facultad y JAMA y explorar mecanismos que faciliten la publicación de investigaciones provenientes de nuestra comunidad académica. En su primera plática, la doctora Vivens Domingo abordará un tema fundamental: la confianza en el proceso de publicación científica. La ciencia médica avanza gracias a un ecosistema en el que investigadores, revisores y editores y clínicos confían en la veracidad, transparencia, ética y rigor metodológico de lo que se publica. Este es un principio esencial porque de la confianza en la evidencia científica depende la calidad de la atención médica y, en última instancia, la vida de las personas. Sin embargo, en un mundo donde la inteligencia artificial está revolucionando la generación de información, surgen preguntas cruciales. ¿Cómo podemos garantizar que los avances en inteligencia artificial se utilicen para fortalecer y no comprometer la integridad de la publicación científica? ¿Cómo evitar sesgos, manipulación de datos o la proliferación de información sin la validación adecuada? ¿Qué desafíos éticos enfrentamos ante el uso de herramientas de inteligencia artificial en la investigación y el proceso editorial? Estas son cuestiones clave en la era digital y estamos seguros de que su perspectiva nos ayudará a comprender cómo preservar la calidad y credibilidad de la literatura científica en este entorno cambiante. En su segunda presentación, la doctora Vivens Domingo, junto con la doctora Kimi Eng, nos ofrecerá una guía valiosa para investigadores y autores sobre el proceso de publicación científica en el grupo de revistas JAMA. Se abordarán aspectos fundamentales sobre lo que las revistas JAMA buscan en los artículos científicos, su proceso editorial y los criterios que guían la selección y la revisión de manuscritos. Además, se presentarán detalles sobre su plataforma editorial, proporcionando información clave para quienes buscan publicar en una de las revistas médicas más prestigiosas del mundo. Escribir y publicar un artículo de alto impacto no solo es una cuestión de estructura y estilo, sino de rigurosidad científica, relevancia clínica y ética en la comunicación de datos. Para la Facultad de Medicina, fortalecer la formación de nuestros estudiantes y académicos en el arte de la publicación científica es fundamental. La investigación no solo debe realizarse con calidad, sino comunicarse de manera efectiva para que su impacto en la salud y la toma de decisiones clínicas sea real. Aprovechando esta visita, nos gustaría explorar la posibilidad de establecer un convenio con JAMA para facilitar el acceso a la publicación de nuestras investigaciones. Actualmente, México no se encuentra en la lista de países con descuento en el Article Processing Charge, lo que representa un obstáculo para muchos de nuestros investigadores, quienes realizan investigación de la más alta envergadura y calidad. Reducir esta barrera permitiría una mayor visibilidad y participación de nuestra comunidad académica en el escenario global, asegurando que los hallazgos científicos desarrollados en nuestra facultad puedan contribuir al avance del conocimiento médico de manera más equitativa. Dr. Vivens Domingo, Dr. Ng, it's a true privilege to welcome you to the Facultad de Medicina of UNAM. Your presence here is not only an inspiration, but also a valuable opportunity for our academic community to engage in meaningful discussions about the future of medical publishing, scientific integrity, and the global impact of research. JAMA Network represents the highest standards of quality and credibility in medical literature, and we are eager to learn from your insights. We also look forward to exploring potential collaborations that can enhance accessibility to high-impact publishing for our researchers. Thank you for being here and welcome to our faculty.
Enseguida, cedemos la palabra al doctor Jaime Sepúlveda Amor, quien hará la presentación de nuestra conferencista invitada, la doctora Kirsten Vivens.
Buenos días a todos, a todas. Doctora Ana Carolina Sepúlveda, mil gracias por esta amable invitación. Les voy a comentar cómo es que conocí a la doctora Kirsten Vivens Domingo hace tiempo, un poco de cuáles son los objetivos de esta visita. Ella va a estar dando su charla en inglés, pero bueno, en un mundo globalizado, en un mundo académico, la verdad es que el inglés se ha vuelto la lengua franca. Creo que lo que puedo contarles de Kirsten es que la conocí hace casi 20 años, cuando en 2007 llegué a la Universidad de California, San Francisco, a hacer un año sabático. Ella, por esa época, estaba creando el Centro de Poblaciones Vulnerables. UCSF, la Universidad de California en San Francisco, ha tenido esta vocación social y ella desde siempre ha tenido preocupación por la salud de grupos vulnerables. Fue más tarde, después de 5 años que estuve en la Fundación Gates, que regresé como director del Instituto de Salud Global, y ella era ya una muy conocida profesora a nivel internacional en epidemiología cardiovascular, sobre todo. Ella estudió en Princeton, la universidad, y estudió después un PhD en bioquímica, después hizo medicina y después una maestría en investigación clínica, todo esto en UCSF. Entonces, aunque ella nació en realidad en Alemania, por circunstancias casuales, su padre trabajaba en el ejército americano, estuvo entonces en Princeton y luego en UCSF, y luego ahí desarrolló su carrera como epidemióloga cardiovascular. y ha estado interactuando con investigadores en el Instituto Nacional de Salud Pública, con Juan Rivera, con Simón Barquera, en estudios de modelaje de predicción de riesgo cardiovascular en jóvenes, en personas adultas jóvenes. Y eso es lo que le ha dado fama mundial. Después, más tarde, fue jefa del Departamento de Epidemiología y Bioestadística en UCSF, hasta que se la robaron a JAMA, y ha sido editora en jefe de la revista JAMA y de toda la red de revistas. Tiene otras 13 revistas en oncología, en muchas otras especialidades. Entonces, Kirsten ha sido una persona muy conocida en el medio de la salud pública de Estados Unidos porque ella fue jefa de la que se llama Fuerza de Tarea de Servicios Preventivos, Preventive Services Task Force. Ella fue la vice chair y luego la chair, que hicieron recomendaciones tan trascendentes como dejar de utilizar el antígeno prostático como un factor predictivo en cáncer de próstata. En fin, ha tenido una gran influencia en la salud pública en Estados Unidos. Y ahora, como editora en jefe de JAMA, tiene pues este especial cariño por México, por los trabajos que ha hecho anteriormente aquí, y la intención es acercarse a la Facultad de Medicina, acercarse a la UNAM, a los institutos nacionales de salud, en búsqueda de una mayor participación de investigaciones de investigadores mexicanos en esta revista, que junto con el New England Journal of Medicine, pues son las revistas de impacto en medicina más alta. Entonces, pues sí, es una gran oportunidad de tenerla aquí por los próximos 4 días. Visitaremos varios de los institutos nacionales de salud, nos reuniremos con el secretario de Salud, el doctor Kersenovich, el próximo miércoles. En fin, estamos buscando que esta semana muy intensa de trabajo logre crear esos acuerdos a los que hablaba la doctora Sepúlveda con JAMA para tener una mayor presencia de investigadores mexicanos en JAMA. Y ya para terminar, un hecho anecdótico simpático: el hijo de Kirsten, que mide creo que más de 2 metros, es un basquetbolista profesional. Está en las grandes ligas del básquetbol. Así es que, bueno, ese es un hecho simpático para compartir. Me da mucho gusto tener aquí a mi amiga Kirsten. Y bueno, vamos a invitarla a Kirsten. Please, your floor.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the Dean for allowing us and to come here today and to bring this wonderful audience and allowing us to talk a little bit more about JAMA and the JAMA Network. And thank you to Dr. Sepulveda for that nice introduction that I think you revealed a few of my secrets. My apologies for speaking in English, but I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you. I have a talk that has 2 parts. The first is a little bit provocative and is to all of us who take part in biomedicine, academics, taking care of patients, leading universities, to think about what it means to have trust in science. The second part is a little bit of an introduction to JAMA and the JAMA Network, and hopefully to get you interested in giving your work to us and allowing us the privilege of publishing your work. So 2 parts, and we'll take questions at the end. So I want to talk first about trust. I have no disclosures. I start all of my talks with this. This is my first editorial when I became editor-in-chief. I've been editor-in-chief now 2.5 years. I've spent all of my life at the university as a clinician, as a researcher, as a teacher, and as a leader. And the question was, why would I take a leave from the university and be a full-time editor-in-chief? And I became a full-time editor-in-chief because I believe strongly in the importance of communicating science, that ultimately the impact of the science that we all do, the care that we want to provide our patients, requires a high fidelity to the communication of the science, both within our communities and to the broader public. And that became clear to me during the pandemic, even more than it had already been. But I came as an editor-in-chief with no experience. So my entire view of what journals do has to do with my perspective as an author and my perspective as a reader. And it turns out that's a pretty good perspective to have, because journals rely on authors to send their work to us, to trust us that we're going to publish this work with high fidelity, we're going to review it with high fidelity and publish it. And readers have to trust us. So thinking about journals from the perspective of the authors and of the readers has informed how I think about what we should be doing as a set of journals. So I'm the editor-in-chief of JAMA, but I'm also the editor-in-chief of the 13 journals that make up the network. Each of these journals in each of these specialties have their own editors-in-chief. They make their own decisions, but we have the same set of guidance for authors and readers across the network, and we use the same platform for publishing. So it means that we can amplify something that might really be in JAMA ophthalmology. We can amplify it across many platforms because, as we know, there are many more interactions between specialties and many ways in which the science connects, even though there might be very specific specialties. So these are the 11 subspecialty journals. And then we have one open access journal. So this is an open access journal, also a general journal like JAMA, but publishes about 10 times as many papers as JAMA publishes, and is, for an open access journal of its size, the top open access journal in its size as a general journal. But before I tell you more about our network, we want to talk about this, trust, right? Trust of authors. How do you trust that when you send your work to us, we'll treat it fairly? How do readers trust that when they read something in JAMA, we have gone through the process? And what I want to suggest to you is that there are several forces at play right now that threaten the trust that people have in the scientific enterprise. And I will just put it out there, not to assign blame or to go into all of the specifics, but to suggest that all of us, wherever we do our science, have to be aware that the trust that the public has generally held science in is at times under threat. And that is something that all of us should be mindful of and should think about in how we make our future decisions, our collaborations, and move forward. So these are some headlines that appeared in the US papers within the past several years. This from the Wall Street Journal, so a top financial journal in the US, talking about fake journals being forced to close. And there's been a rash of fake science, fake journals being forced to close. And when this makes it to the headline of a general audience, it is the type of headline, this is of course not JAMA, but this to an average reader says, can we trust journals anymore when these journals have to close? Why would I trust the journals of the JAMA network when this is happening in other journals? We also have headlines like this. This is from Boston. Also asking, how did bad data slip through? What about research fraud? Did the peer review catch what it was supposed to catch? Are there too many journals, too few reviewers? Again, this isn't JAMA, this isn't any of your work, this isn't any of my colleagues' work, but these types of headlines in the general press are those types of headlines that lead the general public to say, well, can we trust what science is telling us? Can we trust that paper that we read? We've seen these other papers have to be retracted. In Nature this past month, they published globally, what is the trust people have in scientists? So, and I would say globally, you can't see it here, but I'm going to blow it up in a second. Globally, the trust in science is modest. So on a scale of 1 to 5, where 5 is the most trust, scientists across the globe are held at about a 3.5. So not that great. How are we doing in Mexico and in the US? Well, Mexico and the US, we're right next to each other. You can see that scientists are held in trust more than the average globally, but still not that great, right? We could be doing better. In the US, when surveys are done, doctors and nurses are held in the highest esteem, scientists a little bit less. But all of them, since the pandemic, there's been less trust. So not more trust, less trust, right? So this is the backdrop. And you can say, this doesn't really matter. This is an elite institution. And so these types of surveys of the general public don't matter. But they do start to influence politicians. They influence funders. And it's something that I think we need to keep in mind as a backdrop. Certainly, you are undoubtedly aware that we have a new administration in the US. And certainly this mistrust of science is something that is being used politically. But it is something that we all have to be aware of because it does affect the way in which our work is ultimately received. So the 3 trends I want to talk about first starts with this mistrust that is probably on the rise, at least in the US it is, but probably globally it is not where we would like it to be. And it's something that affects all of us, even though we ourselves and our institutions ourselves are not the focus of this. The second trend that I want to suggest to you is important to think about relates to the drive for open access science, and I'm going to call this accessible science. Accessible science is what we all should aspire to. Science is only as good as the next scientist can read the paper, do the next experiment to confirm the results. We should be responsible for making our results available to the broader clinical and public health community who want to apply the science. But the models that we have right now to do this are not ideal. And I'll talk a little bit about open access. And I heard the Dean talk about the article processing charges. This is part of the challenge of the way we have operationalized the ideal of accessible science. So at the JAMA Network, soon after I became the editor-in-chief, we made the decision that all of the science published across the JAMA network can be deposited in public repositories on the day that we publish it. So it can be deposited in public repositories free of charge. There is no fee to do this. The author does this. They deposit their author-accepted manuscript. And this is, we did this because we believe strongly in the idea of accessible science. And this is the way, one way one can accomplish that without any money changing hands. This at the NIH, now it seems like a long time ago, announced this as a potential policy for NIH-funded research at UCSF. When we wrote the editorial announcing this, we said what is important for accessible science is not only access to read, but also access to be able to publish. And very high article processing charges can place publication out of the hands of many scientists, those from less well-funded disciplines, less well-resourced countries or institutions, and that is ultimately damaging to science. We also acknowledge that we have to pay for things that we value, and we have to pay for things like the process that is in place at major journals to really ensure that we have a way of evaluating the science, but also publishing in a way that is accessible in all ways to clinical audiences and patient audiences as well. So let me say that the open access and the article processing charge, the way that we do this, has had some unintended consequences. One of these is that we now have journals that are very large because each article that is published is a little more money for the publisher. So again, we have open access journals. I'm not speaking ill of open access, and I'm in fact not speaking ill of these journals because I've published in many of them. But I will note that the journals have become larger and larger and larger, and some of these journals are less than scrupulous. So many of these journals have been in fact delisted. These are some of the journals that have been had their qualifications revoked from the indexing, right? And this has happened to coincide with the rise in open access publishing. This has led several editors to comment here that when you have a drive that links money and publications, this has a corrupting influence on science, and that it's time for us as a scientific community to rethink what we might do. Thank you. Gracias. This is the former editor of the British Medical Journal, the BMJ, and he here quotes the editor-in-chief of The Lancet that says, "There's a saying in English and in Italian that misconduct is usually the result of either money or sex. But in science, it's money or publications." And so he says we need a rethinking of what we have to do here because we've aligned these in ways that are probably not good for science. The editors-in-chief of that make up the International Committee of Medical Journal Editors published at the beginning of this year a statement of concern about this rise in predatory journals. Predatory journals are essentially fake journals that charge money and make promises and don't often live up to those promises. If you want to understand what a predatory journal is, I found this article quite revealing. This is a postdoc who writes about his experience falling victim to a predatory journal and how hard it was to get out of it. It required paying more and more money to the journal to get his publication back. These journals are on the rise and they're very hard to keep a hold of. And they, of course, this is not what was intended with open access publishing, but they are probably a consequence of the model of publishing where we ask the author to pay for publishing, right? So, two types of trends: mistrust, accessible science, which we should all aspire to, but our current model has a little bit of a unintended consequence. And the third trend I want to talk about is artificial intelligence. So again, artificial intelligence has many aspects that are really outstanding. And as a journal, we have embraced the potential for artificial intelligence to make science more accessible. So artificial intelligence can help authors who in writing their manuscripts, people who are early in their careers, people who are submitting to journals that publish in English, for whom English is not the first language. These tools are extraordinarily powerful and so helpful. And I think do have the ability to make publishing the medical literature more accessible in these ways. It can also help us when we publish, because we now are able to adapt content to many more languages other than English. We can adapt content to more lay audiences when we as publishers use artificial intelligence. And it may help us ultimately to find content that we're looking for. We early on in the rise after ChatGPT, we embraced artificial intelligence at the JAMA Network, but we also felt it was our obligation to help guide authors. So when we published this in January of 2023, ChatGPT had come out in November 2022. When we published this, ChatGPT had already been listed as an author in PubMed a number of times already, right? So what this publication says, you may use ChatGPT. You have to tell us how you use it. But you as an author, take responsibility. Only humans can take responsibility. Non-human authors are not allowed. And when we ask you to sign, speaking to the integrity of your work, you can tell us the tools that you used in your work, but you take responsibility for the good and bad in those tools. And we know these tools sometimes don't act the way we'd like them to, right? So this is an article not from JAMA, but this is an article in the literature, and this is the introduction to this article. Certainly, here's a possible introduction to your topic, lithium, blah, blah, blah. So this is directly from somebody's use of ChatGPT, has cut and pasted that response. And this is obviously an author who has failed to edit and an editor who has failed to find this problem. So, but there are examples like this throughout the literature. There are estimates of how often people are using ChatGPT in the literature. It's very hard. My colleagues who do this work, they say it's very hard to really know. This is an example from JAMA Ophthalmology that shows, you can see in the red outlines, the early version of ChatGPT 3.5. Next to it is I don't know if I can point to this, but is the ChatGPT 4.0. And in the red boxes are all the citations that are fake, that are hallucinated, that the ChatGPT made it up, right? And so you can see here, these versions of ChatGPT have gotten better, but their ability to give you citations with high fidelity has not gotten any better, right? So this is an example. We know authors are going to use this tool, but using this tool and sending me a paper with fake citations, not good. So an author is still responsible for figuring out whether these citations are actually real. This is a known problem, these hallucinations with these large language models. We have also a concern that people use ChatGPT for doing peer review. And this was a study in Nature that basically showed that in this meeting, like a not insubstantial fraction of peer reviews were done using chatbots. So what do we worry about? As I said, we have embraced AI. We want authors, if they seek to use it, but to tell us. What we worry about is the improper use of large language models. Again, that they hallucinate citations if not knowing that and not correcting. We worry about attribution of derivative content because more and more content is derived from other content, and how do you attribute and verify? We worry about fraud. We've always worried about fraud. Fraud is not unique to artificial intelligence, but we have to think about it in this regard. And I think what can be unique to AI is fraud at scale. So pursuing something at a very large scale. And one of the things that I worry about, and I know many editors worry about, is the creation of data, the creation of data sets that are fully fraudulent. Okay, so I have a confession to make. I have now listed 3 problems and I have no solutions. Okay, so, but these are very real trends, right? As I'm sure you all recognize, some of you probably have recognized some of these more than others. These are each very real trends in the way science is conducted right now, in the way publishing occurs right now. And these are 3 trends that, that I do think have the potential to undermine the trust in science. The challenge for solutions is that solutions really do require many aspects of the biomedical enterprise to think together about solutions. These are not solutions that can come solely from the journals. They are not solutions that can come solely from the institutions or solely from an individual investigators. But I think we have to have more discussions about these very real trends because they do threaten to undermine the trust that I think is essential to the way in which we do our work. One thing I will say, because again, acknowledging that in the US, we have a new administration that is using some of these aspects of mistrust for further political gains. One of the things that we felt very important to do is to really speak to the commitments that we have from the way in which we operate. We know that science works because we have the freedom to publish, because we have access to the data sets that we are able to continue to verify a particular publication, to decide and have open exchange of even disagreements about whether we agree with the interpretation of those findings. These are core, and these are in many ways under threat right now in terms of many of the actions. And I think we took a stand here, and I will say we have editors who span the entire political spectrum, but we took a firm stand here just to reaffirm the commitment of our network of journals to the ideals that we have for scientific publication. And I'd urge you to take a look at this editorial because I think it is important. And I think in this environment, it is important that we remember again the types of oaths we take and the types of reasons that we've gone into this particular profession. Okay, I am going to switch gears now, if you'll allow me, to just tell you a little bit about JAMA and the JAMA network. Is it okay? All right, JAMA, we're 142 years old. We are consistently one of the top 5 journals in the world in science and medicine. And many people don't know, but we are the most widely circulated medical journal in the world. JAMA is the flagship, as I said before, of the JAMA network of 13 journals, and I've already introduced you to these journals. Our focus is on our authors and on our readers. So everything we have been doing is really focusing on how do we make the experience better for our authors, how do we think about how our readers consume information, and how do we make sure we're constantly thinking about how to make this better. One of the things that we have worked hard to do is to improve the efficiency in review, so reducing the time from submission to actual publication, and to review and to publication, because we know this is what authors want, and we know readers, we have the responsibility to put high quality science in front of readers as efficiently as possible without lowering our standards for integrity in the process. We have really thought carefully about expanding our editorial team so we have the right expertise on our team, that we have the right sets of backgrounds, that we can think about how we have a constantly regenerating peer reviewer pool, so we use the expertise of our peer reviewers. We have recognized that our journals have the ability to convene on important topics. And so we have hosted a number of in-person convenings in the JAMA Summit, the first on clinical trials, the second on artificial intelligence, and later this month, we will be hosting one on gun violence. We have really embraced innovation, but to try to do that in a thoughtful way. And so we have a lot of initiatives related to artificial intelligence. And we are very keen to make closer connections with authors and readers. And that is why I'm traveling a lot around the globe to really learn from institutions, from individual authors and readers what's important to you and how you make choices about what to read and where to publish. We like to publish by using our platforms to put ideas together in a way to highlight attention to these ideas. This was the cover of our issue, one of the weeks in January. This was an issue devoted to ethics and medical research. We have a fantastic set of illustrators who created this, I think, quite lovely cover. This was timed to coincide with the new updated Declaration of Helsinki, which, as you know, guides the principles around humans participating in research. But we don't just publish, we want to publish the commentary and the perspectives from a number of people around this. So this is the publication from the World Medical Association, the Declaration of Helsinki. And this appeared with 10 different viewpoints to really highlight aspects from particular perspectives. This is from two authors from PAHO, talking about the view from the Americas on the Declaration of Helsinki and medical research taking place in the Americas. This is an example from a colleague in Canada talking about AI and how AI and the rise of AI will really have an impact on the considerations outlined in the declaration. And all of this is collected then in our compendium on research ethics that you can find here. As I mentioned, we have a fantastic group of illustrators. So much of what we do is to try to make even more mechanistic science accessible to a broad clinical audience and even a more lay audience because we are trying to explain the concepts behind new therapeutics and other things like that. We publish on all of the social platforms, and we'd invite you to follow us on our social platforms. So anyone that you like, we're probably on it. I will say that everything that we publish on these social platforms is free when we publish it. There's a toll-free link. So if it's on a platform and we've elevated, you'll never hit a paywall. Similarly, if you sign up for our email alerts, you will get a weekly email that will show you those articles for the week that are in front of the paywall. So our whole goal here within our publishing model is to make sure that if you saw something on X or on WhatsApp that you can actually, whoever can see it, can read it, even if they're not at an institution that most academic institutions subscribe. We also do things to try to make things accessible. So this is an interview that appears on with clips from the interview with the authors.
We've been doing it for about a year and a half. So I'd like to ask each of you how these results should inform patient care in the ICU and beyond.
This is, if you want to follow us on WhatsApp, feel free to use this QR code. You can do that. And again, all of our platforms work the same way, and we put a toll-free link. It's not free forever, but it's usually free for a number of weeks. And so that way, if somebody else who's not following JAMA finds that particular post, they can actually read it and read the article there. This is more for our authors, and you can see this. This is for the authors page. Oh, let me go back so that if anyone wants to get that for the authors page, this is links for the authors. And then let me just tell you a little bit deeper on JAMA, and I'll just go through this quickly. I like the cover of JAMA, even though we're a digital journal, really digital first. The print cover allows me to tell you how we're organized. We have research, that's in one of the columns. We have opinion, that's in the middle column. And we publish a lot of education, right? Education for clinicians, review articles, as well as education for patients. I want to highlight here, review articles oftentimes will have, I think, very nice clinical algorithms about how to go through making decisions. I believe this one here is on diabetic. No, this one here is on, diabetic foot ulcers, right? So that's an example. But also we will do patient pages, and JAMA has done patient pages for as long as I can remember. These are always free. And these are information usually with nice graphics for patients. The other thing that many don't know, this is what's pinned right now to our social posts, is what is measles. As you know, we're having a measles outbreak right now in Texas. But all of our patient pages are actually published in English and in Spanish. And we've always done this. It's not well known that we do this, but we have always published all of our patient pages in English and in Spanish. But let me talk about research publications. You're an esteemed research institution, and I just want to briefly tell you what it's like publishing at JAMA. So we have two types of research articles, the longer standard form as well as the short form. We're interested in clinical trials. About half of what we publish are clinical trials, but half are observational studies. We do publish early translational articles, and we're very interested in innovations like AI. As you well know, it's hard to get published in major journals. And so the numbers don't work. And this is just in general what is true for the top journals. They receive literally thousands of research articles annually. At JAMA, we get almost 10,000. About 75% are rejected after editorial assessment without review. 25% undergo peer review. So if you've made it to the peer review stage, it's great. There are great articles that will ultimately be rejected that are great articles, but they just don't meet our standard at that particular point. 15% are discussed at editorial meetings. That means about 10 to 12 articles are discussed per week. About 5% are published. We publish about 3 to 5 articles a week. So you can see these numbers are not good, right? These numbers are not good for any given author. And what that means is that there's a lot of outstanding work that we end up rejecting, not because it is not good work, but because we only publish about 200 long articles a year. And so that's what the numbers look like. And that's what our peer journals, that's what the numbers generally look like. What do we look for? We're looking for how important a problem is, and we want authors to tell us why their problem that they're tackling is of particular importance. We're a general journal. We rely on subspecialists. You heard about Dr. Ng, who's an oncologist. So we rely on the subspecialists to tell us what's important, but we rely as much on authors and peer reviewers to tell us why this article is important, what the implications are of this finding. We're looking for originality. We're looking for rigorous methods, reliable methods, and transparent reporting of these methods. We're a clinical journal, so we need something to be relevant to our clinical readership, right? So make it relevant to what is going to happen in clinical practice. We want things that are going to improve the ability for clinicians to make decisions. As those of you who are clinicians know, that's ultimately the goal that we're trying to achieve. And then we want to have clear writing that people want to read. So a great article is something that is clearly written and people actually enjoy reading and getting to the answer in that article. I will say most of our editors, I'd like to say all of our editors, but I'll say most of our editors want to be helpful. We are really trying to help you. Authors and editors are on the same side, even though it feels like we're on different sides. So mostly reviewers want to be helpful and mostly editors want to be helpful. We encourage authors to follow the journal instructions. That's the best way to start off on a good foot. To think about all the comments, because somebody took a lot of time to write comments, and a peer reviewer and some editor took a lot of time, and we met in meetings. So even if you don't agree, don't just ignore the comments. Respond to them and tell us why we got it wrong, because we're only humans. We can get it wrong as well. Avoid shortcuts. there's no shortcuts to either conducting good science or submitting and publishing. If it's rejected, tell the next journal how you address these points. This is one thing we suggest to most authors, to think about this. And then once published, respond to questions from editors. Part of the scientific publication process is that we're always querying the science. You know, did you really have this? How did this experiment work? And that type of ongoing dialogue, I think, is part and parcel of a healthy scientific discussion. What does our process look like? A paper comes in, it's going to be triaged by one of our editors who's going to assign the paper to the appropriate subspecialty editor. So a paper might make it to Dr. Ng if it's in oncology. The editor might decide early on just to reject it, but mostly the 25% they're going to assign to one of the editors. The editor might reject, might refer. And one thing I want to say is that we have a network of journals, and the referral to those journals is a benefit for authors. So each of those journals works separately, but one of the benefits to authors is that we can quickly refer to one of our network journals. So an oncology paper that Dr. Ng might decide is better for JAMA Oncology because it's really better for a subspecialist audience, she can refer very quickly, have a conversation with Dr. Desis, who's our editor-in-chief of JAMA Oncology, and to have that paper transferred. If that editor sends it for peer review, the peer review comes back, that editor will decide then again to reject or to refer, and hopefully, if it's your paper, it makes it to our manuscript meeting at JAMA. And at the manuscript meeting, it is a bunch of our editors, many in person, many virtually, having the discussion about why this paper should make it into JAMA. And the good news is if you've made it this far, about half the papers that come out of manuscript meeting actually end up being we ask for a revision, and ultimately they're accepted for publication in JAMA. So the things that I want you to take away from this process are, it is competitive, but we really are trying to be fair, efficient, and responsive. And that's our goal as an editorial team, because we owe that to both our authors and our readers, to each of these three aspects. The editors make decisions as a team. We make decisions as a team with input from reviewers and statistical reviewers. Reviewers don't make decisions. So for those of you who might be concerned that that reviewer number 2 had something terrible to say, the editors on our team, we have a lot of experience looking at reviewer number 2. So we're not overly swayed by reviewer number 2. And we have a lot of checks in place to make sure that we are not. I'd urge you to be responsive to editors. Again, our goal is to work together to arrive at the best possible outcome for your work. And I think a major asset for authors and a major advantage for authors is that transfers within the JAMA network is a major benefit. As somebody said of us, there are a few families of journals. Our journal family is not too small and not too big. So each of our editors are independent, but when I call or Dr. Ng calls and says, we really like this paper, but we can't publish this paper because it's too specific for an oncology audience. The other editors listen to that. We listen to each other, and we're small enough that we call each other. We're not just working through the triage, the computer system. And I do think that is a benefit for our authors. Of our 13 journals in our network, 10 of them are in the top 5 within their field. So this is it's a pretty good network of journals. All right, so this is the power of the JAMA network. And I have now exhausted all of my time, but I'm happy to take questions and comments and criticisms and concerns about either the first part of my talk or the second part of my talk or both. And thank you so much.
Hi, Dr. Vivens, and thank you to Dean Sepulveda for inviting you. I'm old enough to have published in JAMA when it was printed. And the best hand-holding I ever had was by a JAMA editor. I am so old that this was done through fax.
Whoa.
That's how old I am. So the reason why I'm saying this is because I remember the only time I've ever published in JAMA, I got a lot of feedback from the editor. And we find JAMA very intimidating. It's very intimidating. It's very difficult to publish. Every time you submit, they ask you to have a native speaker. This is of course, chat.
Yeah.
And so my question to you would be, what advice would you give? I know you're trying to be fair, responsive, trustful, reliable, and efficient and competitive, but in Mexico, we find it very challenging to publish with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that question. And thank you for having published in JAMA, but thank you for that question. So I'm going to say something now that I'm not minimizing what you're saying. JAMA was too hard on its English-speaking US authors too. We were just too hard on authors. I will tell you that. And so I can only imagine, especially if we're saying, well, have a native speaker, that feels like that's too much. One of the things, I think, because I have the perspective of an author and a reader, as I said, no, we're not doing that. So our goal is to be as clear to you about what we think needs to be improved for this paper. If we think this paper doesn't have a chance to make it, even with improved language, let's say, we're going to tell you that. So that you can take the paper somewhere else. We're going through, if you look right now, we used to put authors through multiple rounds of revision. Right now, we are streamlined down. You can ask him. I'm on them all the time because we are streamlining it down, because if we like the science, we're professional editors. We should be able to work with you to get that paper to publication in a much more streamlined way. And that's what we're committed to doing. We have tools, authors have tools. If we communicate back and forth, we should be able to. So my biggest advice, and I say this honestly to all my English-speaking audiences as well, is that if it's been a while since you've tried JAMA, try us again. Okay?
I have a question,
Please.
Following that one. Most researchers in Mexico feel like the first world publishers and peer reviewers have some kind of discrimination against third world country research. They have some mental bias against us, including it's not quality research. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that is right. So where can bias creep in? Creeps in many ways, right? In the US, I would say we're even biased. Oh, we like this institution and not this institution in the US. We might be biased because if the English is not from a native English speaker, I might say, well, that's not as well written. I might be biased if you did your study in 13 sites across Mexico. That's Mexico. Is that relevant to a US audience? I'm just giving the top reasons why bias might creep in. I would say we are actively working for that not to be the case. So first of all, I want the best science wherever it is across the globe. If you look at the trials we've published most recently, I would say half of them have been done fully outside the US, right? We just published a trial last month in a multi-center trial in Brazil. But I have to be mindful of how to overcome bias at every stage, right? So that means we are thinking about how do we make our editorial team actually have more editors who are not US based? How do we make sure our reviewers are also outside the US in addition to US based? I think many things about language can be overcome, especially because there's so much technology. And then I think what I want us to have the conversation about is, I'm still publishing for a global audience. So you as an author have to tell me why this multi-center trial in Mexico, who is it relevant to? Is it only relevant to Mexico? That might be good. Mexico's an important country. It's a big country. That might be good. Who is it relevant to? Is it relevant to all of Latin America, all of the Americas? And that's where we have to have that discussion back and forth. I'll give you an example. We published a trial done solely in the UK, and on negative pressure dressings for surgical site infection. And the UK author came to us. He only publishes at Lancet. And I said, well, do we use this negative pressure dressing in the US? He had no idea where outside the UK the negative pressure dressing was used. And I said, okay, you have to meet me halfway. So you tell me, is this relevant to the world? Is it relevant to low and middle income countries? Who is it relevant? Who uses negative pressure dressings? I don't know. And so that's what I want us to get to the point where authors and editors are discussing that issue of generalization and not these other things where we're immediately biased. We're working hard to do it. You should tell us if you think we got it wrong.
Have you explored the possibility of young authors or young researchers of a text contributing in your journal? Because it's one of the most worldwide is your journal. So I think for young people or young researchers or clinicians, it's very important to publish a section for young people.
Yeah, it's a great idea. JAMA used to have a section for medical students. We've explored a number of things for early career folks, and I will say that I at the university, this was an area of passion of mine, is those who are early in their careers. So I'll give you a few. They're not quite the section you're talking about. So one of the things I would say is JAMA Network Open has a very strong tradition of publishing the first folks who are earlier in their careers. And I think JAMA Network Open is a great way for people who might have something that is not yet something JAMA would publish to get used to the JAMA network, the process, because they're really outstanding editors. We can also amplify publications from JAMA Network Open across all of our platforms. Every single one of our journals, with I think one exception, now has a fellowship that we invite people who are early in their careers to become part of our editors team. And we at JAMA, we have now 8 fellows, 2 from outside the US, because we want to demystify the whole process of what it's like to behind the scenes in a manuscript meeting. And I think you'll be seeing, we have 2 things we'll probably launch this year that again are to do more outreach to those people who are early in their careers. So I don't know if we'll do a section for them, but we are doing a lot more outreach so that people understand the process and think about us.
Well, for me, thank you very much for your excellent talk, because it has been very helpful to understand how the editor works behind. No? It's not only for the authors, the problem to use AE, because you show us that you also use it.
Mm-hmm.
No? And sometimes it's right, and sometimes it doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
At least in my case, I have found that when they send us some comments, for example, a reference list, you show one example, this is not working. The reference exists, but I don't know why the AI doesn't find them. No? Well, this is an example that for me I was like, what is wrong?
I know.
And I'm a basic research, so it will be interesting when you go to the clinicians. I collaborate with them, but for them, the problem is that they don't have time to write.
Mm-hmm.
And for us, sometimes the collaboration is not funded.
Yes.
So we easily, or not so easily, can get some funds for research, but it's not enough. Nowadays, it's more difficult for us, for these countries. The challenge is even harder because the funding is
Less.
going down.
Yes.
Okay, so at least in my case, it is very helpful to understand how you work, because when you refer our publishers, when you don't find them interesting, for example, the writing, it is easily to find a way to improve our style. Maybe.
Mhm.
No, there are some journals that they do,
Yes.
like Archives of Medical Research in Mexico. I like that, no? But we don't have time. We have a few resources, no? And then we have to write for and look for journals that can be fast.
Yes.
They don't charge us too much, or
Yes.
the university collaborate with them, so
Yes.
we can skip it, no? So for me, it was a lesson, and I appreciate your talk, but at least I'm looking for journals that is easier for us,
Yes.
no, not to lose time or to be charged, no?
Yeah, so I appreciate what you're saying, because I think you're describing something in that I appreciate. There are many things I don't understand in the Mexican context, but is the issue for many is that you want to find the place that will be the right home for your journal. And if you think it is something that you're that the way the science is phrased, that the journal is not going to be receptive to it, or if it is something that it'll end up with too high of a fee and we're not going to get, then those are things that it's hard, because nobody wants to waste their time on something that isn't going to have a likelihood of happening. So I fully appreciate what you're saying. I do think, again, I hope with the technologies that that the issues across language will just become easier. I think the things about how to describe work that is relevant for a clinical audience, even if it is more basic work, is an art that many people are not good at doing. Many people are not good at doing. And I think our editors are sensitive to that. They always want to understand. Our whole discussion in manuscript meeting is, well, are people changing their practice because this? If people know this finding, does it make a clinician do something different? Sometimes it might be earlier translational work, but it might be the kind that JAMA wants. If it's earlier translation, is that thing that sets off a thinking about a new way of thinking about the disease or a new line of therapeutics. But it is the author's job to help us to understand why it's important, right? Especially at JAMA, where we're a general journal, right? So we can't possibly know everything. And so that is part of the author. And that is, I think, the challenge there. So if I want to remove all those things that we should be able to do, making the translations easier, making the, like the whole process easier, but ultimately we want to spend our time focused on you saying, why do you think this is the most important thing? How does that relate to what a clinician will do differently if they read your results? And then for us to try to understand it and review it and think it in that context. And ultimately, that is the type of language that is what makes compelling papers for us at JAMA. And then I think the choice of JAMA versus the others is sometimes it's really important, but really just a subspecialist needs to know this. Like, I'm a generalist. I can't appreciate all of the nuances of that specific disease or that specific mechanism. That's better in a subspecialty journal than in the general journal. And then some. JAMA Network Open publishes 2,000 papers. JAMA publishes 200. They take more risks. They oftentimes have more interesting science. I'll tell you that. If you look at some of our top viewed science in the network, it's in JAMA Network Open. These are high quality publications. And they might be single site. They might be just in a specific area. It's not bad science. It's great science. It's just by the time it gets to JAMA, it's more likely to be a multi-center trial or a big observational study by the time it's in JAMA. And so some is just knowing where to try first, right? And thinking about how the journal editors are thinking about the science they're getting.
I haven't read JAMA, but maybe because I didn't see while we are working on genomics, and I didn't see any area specific for that.
Yeah,
Can you?
it's a good point. Yeah, I think areas like genomics are ones where the question is, what kind of genomics paper would make it into JAMA? And I would say that we have published genomics, but it's much more when we're close to really understanding the clinical applications, right? So we do have quite a good editor for genetics and genomics, but the sweet spot for JAMA is when it's close to being ready for clinical practice, right? It can still be on the earlier side, but it needs to be a large enough study. It needs to have the clinical implications clear for a genomics type paper. And again, it's just priority of like 200 papers, that's others of our journals, like in oncology, I'm not sure about genomics and oncology. Oncology will take many more things that are earlier stage in that translational cycle. But for JAMA, it really is the application that we got to be a little closer to.
I would like to ask you a question about what you were talking earlier about AI.
Yeah.
Like, we all know there are certain tools we can use to decipher if the text is written with AI, but we all know that they are not always certain about it. It has been demonstrated, like when you write and use certain tools, it most likely will tell you that you used AI even though you didn't.
Yes.
So my question is about how can you certainly know about the articles or research that are submitted when the references are not made up by AI? And how would you go about approaching that topic?
Yeah, it's such a great question. So yes, my colleagues who are computer scientists, they always remind me that there are no good tools to tell you whether AI has been involved in that. And we don't use tools to tell us whether AI. So we are not going to accuse you of using AI to write your papers, but we are going to expect you to take responsibility for the work, right? So we're never going to say, oh, well, we put it through this computer and like you used AI and you didn't tell us. That's not going to happen. But we do expect, like for everything, authors always speak to the integrity of the work. But now your question is, how do we make sure that the publications are real? That we've always had. We've always had a publication checker. Like we've always had a tool that checks the publications, because in the olden days, authors might miswrite the citation, right? They might just not have put it in the right way. So we've always had a verification checker to look to see. What I want to just speak to is that it's not good form for an author to have all of their publications or a large number not meet the verification checker, especially if they didn't tell us they were using AI. It's just an example. It helps the editors start to, at that point, not have confidence that the author is being transparent with us. Does it make sense? So, and I think organizations like ours that spend all of our time publishing, we have a lot of tools. We have tools that tell us whether something was plagiarized, that does similarity checks. We have tools that see whether the citations are correct. And we're going to have more of those tools. Those tools are not themselves perfect, but they are very good. you can imagine the plagiarism checkers now, because we allow authors to put on preprint servers, there might be other publications out there that look similar. So editors still spend a lot of time, even with these tools, making sure we don't penalize an author because they did put it on a preprint server. But the tools are pretty good, and they will help us to, because we want to stand behind the work just like you want to stand behind the work.
I have two more questions.
Oh,
one, one as an editor-in-chief
Uh-huh.
of two journals in Mexico, and the other one as a dean.
Okay.
The first one is as an editor-in-chief. How do you deal with peer review willingfulness? How do you engage good, constructive peer reviewers? And the second one, as a dean, how can our very prestigious researchers become peer reviewers at JAMA?
Oh, fantastic. Oh, I like the second one. Yes. So, one of the challenges is, as you say, our whole medical publishing system is built on peer review. And peer review is that great service that we all do to the integrity of the scientific literature, right? Because in general, peer reviewers are not paid. I even think if peer reviewers were paid, I couldn't possibly pay someone enough for what a good peer review is worth. A good peer review is just, it's so important to making a paper better. So to your first question, how do we, so we have a pretty good peer review bank. We rate our peer reviewers. And I will say at JAMA, in general, peer reviewers say yes. They're more likely than not to say yes. But across our 13 networks, 13 journals, I know that it's hard to get peer reviewers to say yes. And oncology, JAMA Network, many of them will say it's really hard. And a lot of the delays for publication are about peer reviewers. We've tried a few things. We recognize peer reviewers. We now write, for the top peer reviewers, we write letters to their dean and saying, this person has done multiple peer reviews for JAMA. All of their reviews are outstanding. You should think about that in the promotion as you're looking at for this faculty member. For some, like JAMA Network Open, they have distinguished reviewers are on their mastheads. So if you've done more than a certain number of reviews, your name appears all the time on the masthead. So we're not paying, but we're trying to recognize. We will soon launch a peer review academy, because one of the things I worry about is there are people who are earlier in their careers who would be great peer reviewers if we also told them what we want to see in a peer review. And many people early in their careers have said, we want you to help us to do that. And so we've done that, and we think if we do this peer review, we will give people some documentation to take back for their own credentials. At JAMA, I would say great peer reviewers oftentimes participate and will write editorials for us for the papers that were published. We recognize them in other ways. We seek them out for being part of our network of things that we publish. And so I sort of feel like, again, our job as journals is to help reviewers to do this well, to recognize those that are doing it well because we are grateful to them, to do that in a way that hopefully has currency for them, like sending a letter directly to the dean, and to constantly figure out how they become part of our larger scientific family. How can you all be peer reviewers? Just let me know. Seriously. The best thing is if you tell me your area of expertise. Because we're constantly looking, and in fact, we have a much more deliberate effort for people who raise their hand to try them out, right? And we're always rating peer review. So if you're not doing a good job, we're going to tell you that. But we are constantly trying to refresh our peer reviewer pool, especially for the reasons we talked about before for bias.
I agree with that, all your comments. And I would like to ask you a comment about JAMA in general. I have no doubt is one of the best and top journals around the world. And in my field, in the recent decades, the journal Surgery, it's one of the best, I think is the high impact factor journal in my field. It was for more than 4 decades, the Annals of Surgery, and now the work of George, as a JAMA family, that includes the JAMA surgery and many other fields. I will say, it's a great job. So just to say congratulations for your visit here at National University and our institution. And from my perspective, the JAMA Journal will be one of the best top journals in my field.
Oh, thank you so much for saying that. Yeah, Dr. Melina Kibbe is the editor-in-chief of JAMA Surgery. She, hopefully you won't be offended if I say this, she runs her journal like a surgeon would run a journal. She has all her surgeons in line. She gives them performance metrics back to them. So her journal runs very well. She's a very hands-on editor. She has other editors who work with her to triage, but she always makes sure she's not going to miss something that would be important. She takes it very seriously. And so it's a real pleasure in that field to have someone like her and her team. They're very active editorial board and journal.
About review, peer review, it's possible, may I suggest you to have a JAMA Latin American peer review?
Let me make sure I understand. You want not a journal. You're saying a peer review. So how would that be? So that we get more peer reviewers from Latin America? Yes. Yeah, I agree. I agree. Part of me being here is so that I can hear from you and you can hear from me, and that you say, yes, I'd love to review for JAMA, and that I hear, oh yeah, we should get more reviewers. That is exactly why we're spending time. Is that?
Kristen, I'm going to make a question in English, but translate it in Spanish also.
Please.
Lo que le voy a preguntar a la doctora es un par de preguntas provocadoras, y después de esto tenemos que irnos a Cuernavaca a otra reunión en el Instituto Nacional de Salud Pública. So the two questions I have, one is about trust. You started with the concept of trust. That's kind of a major common denominator here. Now, in an era, in times where alternative facts, both in the US administration, but we also had here in Mexico a policy of alternative facts coming from the top down. From the very higher office. When in the US now, there is a Secretary of Health and Human Services who's an anti-vaxxer. When in the US, there is an epidemic of measles with children dying of measles already. So what is the response we in academia could have to push back and defend truth and trust? So that is one question for you.
That's one? That's like the big question.
Some global agencies have tier pricing, and also pharmaceuticals have tier pricing. The US market, the European market, then the Latin American, the African. So there are different prices according to the purchase power of the country in place. Would you think possible some kind of tier system for authors from poor countries to have a different publishing fee in JAMA?
So let me take the second one first, and then I'll do the first one. So right now, so we have 2 open access journals. So they're paid to publish, right? All of our subspecialty journals are hybrid journals. So you don't have to pay. If you want to make it open access, you can pay, but you don't have to. And JAMA, we don't have an open access option, so you never pay. So for most of the journals, you have the ability to pay to publish without paying. It's only for our 2 fully open access journals where this is an issue. For those, the publishers have basically, if it is a Hinari country, so a country in the very bottom, they automatically have a free, the fee is waived. But we don't have tiers, which is what I think you're alluding to. We know our fees are modest. We're on the modest side when we look at our peers. And we look at them and we know this because the commercial publishers, we're independently published. The commercial publishers in general have the highest fees, unfortunately. So we have tried to keep ours modest. And that's the way that we have, been organized. That's how it was organized even before I showed up there. I think that we are in an environment, I've made it very clear that JAMA is a global set of journals, and we have to be a global set of journals. And I think we have to be attuned to the changes in the environment, to the realities of where the science is, to the true barriers to publication, while still running our business. Because we have a business that we're independent nonprofit. We are not trying to make money, we're trying to pay our bills. So I'm open to discussions on this. Because I do think that we have to be a global journal. We do have to pay our bills, and we have to figure out how it works in the right way. And I would say if anybody has a paper that went through and you felt that there isn't a means to pay, you should petition the editors. All right, now your big question. So I'm going to say an unpopular opinion. So I, of course, fully agree with you. The concerns that we have right now in the U.S., both related to the funding of science, but also the narrative around there are alternatives to long-standing prevailing views in science, I think is really, it is very concerning. I will say that I think we also have to look a little bit in the mirror as a community and say, to me, so I'll tell you a phrase I have never liked, trust in science. I don't like that phrase because science itself is going to give me sometimes things that are not true and sometimes things that are true. I think we should have trust in the process, the scientific process, where you publish, I say, I don't believe that result. I try to do that experiment and I figure it out. And then we all over time figure out what the truth is likely to be, right? Somewhere between you in good faith doing your science, me in good faith trying to replicate it. Many of our peer reviewers saying, well, Jaime didn't do this and Kirsten did this, and maybe that's the thing. That's what we have to have trust in. And I do think in the same way, we all have our biases that, contravailing views to traditionally held beliefs in science oftentimes don't make it into the journals. That's true. And much of what we're talking about now is a backlash against discussions that were happening during COVID, and a lot of which were about public policies in COVID and the translation of scientific facts into a public health policy. And my view, and it's more challenging to do this, my view is that we as journals have to look in ourselves in the mirror a little bit and say, you know, what range of views are we willing to tolerate? Are we, if just because this isn't how I would approach it, can I fairly evaluate another topic? And that's why when you have the incoming head of the NIH is somebody who has a very strong counter view. And I do think as academics, we have to figure out how we create environments that we're having discussions about the facts. Unfortunately, what it is now, and that's why I started with that mistrust, is that now we have people who, like, these facts are not in dispute by any reputable scientists, right? That vaccination is the best prevention for measles. That's not in dispute. But we are now entering a debate where you have the head of HHS saying, but cod liver oil could work. And that's an environment where we're somewhere different. And so I think we have to look ourselves in the mirror and say, okay, are we open to all, you know, scientifically rigorous types of studies, no matter their point of view? Because if we're not willing to do that, we open the door for lots of things that are way worse, in my view. And it's a tricky ground. It is part of the reason that we wrote that editorial, because and again, I have editors who I know hold different views than I hold. And they made me tone down certain things in that piece. We toned up certain things. You know, but I believe we have more common ground on the oaths we take as physicians, on the principles that we hold dear as scientists. And we have to be able to speak out clearly on those, because that's the only thing that's going to hold us in good stead in this environment.
Muchas gracias por su presencia. Thank you very much, Dr. Kirsten Bivens, for your conferences and letting us know about the JAMA process and inviting us to publish and peer review in your journal. We will be most grateful and enthusiastic on participating, and we highly value your journal for publishing our research. We also want to thank you for your time and your visit to our institution, and you're welcome anytime you want. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias. It's been
Muchísimas
great. Thank you
gracias.
so much. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias. Y en este momento, la doctora Ana Carolina Sepúlveda Vildoso, nuestra directora, hará entrega de un reconocimiento a la doctora Kirsten Bivens Domingo por su valiosa participación. Brindémosle un fuerte aplauso, por favor. Y antes de despedirnos, quisiéramos que nos ayudaran para sacar una fotografía grupal con nuestras autoridades, con nuestro presidium. Si nos ayudan, por favor, colocándose de pie.